We are here at the panel for Creating Belonging, Found Families and Other Systems. And I am your moderator, AJ Fitzwater. My pronouns are they, them. My description is I am a white person with pink hair and black glasses, wearing a black t-shirt with the 4 unicorns of the apocalypse on it. I'm in Otutahi, Christchurch, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I will introduce our panelists first, and then I will get into the format of how and why and what we're going to talk about. So first off, we'll start off with A.Y. Chow, who writes under A.Y. Chow, and her name is Alice. And I asked one interesting thing about each panelist and one thing about found families that they love. So Alice's interesting thing is that she was a lawyer who turned yarn dyer and now is a writer. And the thing that she likes about found families is the thread that connects people is an unexpected epiphany. So Alice, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and what brings you to found families.
Oh, I should unmute myself first. Yes, I am Alice. Should I do a description as well? I'm Chinese. I have dark hair with pink fronds, and I'm wearing a green dress. And yeah, I'm in a room. I have my books behind me. I use the pronouns she and they, and my name is Alice. I live in England. I'm a writer, but you can tell from the accent, I'm not British. I'm originally from Canada. And found family, I think, is something that is so important. I've lived in a lot of places as an expat, and my family, I'm an only child. So my family is found family, people who aren't necessarily blood, but who give me that sense of support and warm fuzzies. And I think it's really nice, everybody has that with family. It's not always smooth sailing, and sometimes they're not particularly nice people. And I think it's important to know that you can choose your family. Blood isn't everything. So I think that's something that, yeah, I think it's really important in life.
Thank you, Alice. And our next panelist is Jennifer Spurko. Her interesting fact is that she's in a theatre group called the Trash Panda Players, and I just adore this name. And they do Shadowcast productions. And the thing about found families is she likes how they form under pressure. So Jen, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you come to found families.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I'm coming to you in high contrast because the sun has not yet come up here where I am in East Tennessee, but that my location is relevant to my story. I'm an overweight white woman with long gray hair, wearing a blue shirt, and in a room that is mostly dark behind me. But my location here in Southern Appalachia is part of why found families in real life are so important, because as a queer person and as as a creator in the Bible Belt, one looks for one's connections where one can and band together. And particularly now, and we can talk on the Discord about how my state has been in the national and international news lately. But it's an important thing. And the reason I mentioned the pandas is that the trash pandas is that that's my real life found family. I think I was put on this panel, however, because I do a podcast about Our Flag Means Death, which I think is a wonderful example of found families. And thanks to you and your nation, Jay, for this wonderful media.
Oh, that's fantastic. And just quickly, a little bit about myself. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer. My interesting thing is that that one time at Disneyland, I rode Space Mountain 8 times in a row because I love that ride so much. And I like found families because they actively seek out the people they want to surround themselves with, and they look for the love that they need, and they might not have always got. So the way we are going to do this panel is we're going to do it like a kind of inverted triangle. And one of the, well, important to building found families is starting with your world building, and the bigger picture is what's happening in the background, and the systems and the functions and the structures that created the society that these found families and teams need to find each other. They happen within the world building, and while you might not need to think hugely about it, you do need to think about it and have it as the background noise of the story. So we're going to start with the inverted triangle. We're going to go with a really wide focus to begin with. Thinking about the environment these characters and groups come up through, and what those environments influence them, and how those environments influence them. Then we'll come down to a middle focus, which is the actual legal and social systems that these people are operating in. And then we come down to the really narrow focus, which is the actual individual characters and how they interact with each other. And if we've got time, we'll talk about our favorite tropes of the individual characters that we need, that we like. So if you have some questions, put them in the chat or in the Discord, and we'll make some time at the end of the panel for some questions from the audience. So let's hit it off with the wide focus world building. So let's start off basically with geography and how geography functions to create a country, a society. So would anybody like to put up their hand to begin with, to talk about maybe the function of a country or a country's borders, or the history of a country or a community that you need to think about when creating a found family? Go ahead, Jen.
Well, as I'm in the United States, of course, we have a long and despicable history of, exploiting not only our natural resources, but the indigenous people, and then who were here, and then of course importing, enslaved people. So I think our status, sort of geographically, as quote unquote the New World, really lend itself to that, like the separation of those storied and centuries of history behind the indigenous people that were here, but separate from the countries that that became colonizers, I think really led to that. And so this trying to avoid not using any patriarchal kind of cliches, but you've all heard of this, or this the virgin continent, and these like really upsetting exploitative descriptions of this new world, which of course wasn't new. And so I think that the irresistible to capitalism and to white supremacy and patriotism to exploit what looked, like what was treated as a virgin country, I think is really important in our real world history. And so I think you can, in creating one, thinking about that, like, is there and I know y'all are both sitting in island nations, so you can speak to this, in a different way, but that one can create maybe separate continents or isolated continents that are discovered, and that puts a pressure cooker on, I think, found family. So yeah, I don't know. I may have rambled a little bit. I'm sorry about that, AJ, but that was what was on my mind.
No, that's fine. It's a great place to start. Alice, go ahead.
Sorry, I was trying to block my dog out from.
No,
He's like,
puppy is fine.
he's licking his butt.
We-
I was like,
I've
not
never seen
allowed.
that before. I'm shocked and
Leave him.
horrified.
Puppies
Yeah, no,
are part of
country.
a fan family.
He is absolutely my little rescue dog. Yeah, country borders are very interesting, especially because they also move, like they change, and like just because I'm writing in 1930s Shanghai, and part of that is like looking back at the history of China, like that itself, like their borders have kind of shift and change, but also the ruling classes changed. You know, they were Mongols at one point, and they were the Jurchens at one point. They came in, and you know, like that has an interesting effect on who like the trends, the cultural social mores, and like I think that also has a big impact. And also, you know, like when borders shift, like for example, Alsace, where they're like, oh, they're part of Germany, no, they're part of France, no, they're part of Germany, you know, and that really has an impact on the kind of identity that you create for yourself, and who you decide. Oh yes, right. So who am I going to connect with in which ways? So yeah, it's a very interesting way of dividing people, connecting people. And then also what Jen said, you said like the crucible, like forming ties through, what do you call it? I was just reading something where they said true friendship is where you have shared salt, as opposed like, and salt meaning, you know, shared trials and tribulations. And I think that's something that's very connecting as well.
Mm, I'm very interested in the way geography and borders and colonization informs how people move across provinces, across countries, um, across oceans and all that sort of thing. And we're not just thinking about a planet-based systems as well. We're thinking about space-based as well. So there's all the different environments that people move across, and those inform the technological changes and the way people transport themselves, and how that technology informs how they reach out to distant people, and how those distant people connect. And one of the really interesting series that I feel where geography plays a huge part in shaping a person literally and metaphorically is the Broken Earth trilogy, because some of those people are actually made of the planet.
Yes.
And I find that really fascinating about how the comms are made from the history and the geography, how the people were formed by their living culture and the history and the environment and the seasons that are happening. And yeah, that is a great example to look at for while the families come together and break apart, and they're not always really well together. The geography is a fantastic one to look in that one. Now, also part of the movements between countries and islands and all that sort of thing is how that creates the history. So would anybody like to talk more about how history and living culture and mythology informs the creation of communities and the intermovement of people between communities and systems?
Um,
Yeah, go ahead, Alice.
So that brought to mind something like Buddhism that came from India and traveled all the way across China and then across to Japan and various countries there, like Korea and whatnot. And how, you know, that's movement that has, you know, religious ties, but it also has cultural ties. They brought tea with them because the Buddhists didn't drink and they wanted to meditate and stay awake. And that's how like tea was disseminated and became, for example, it went over into Japan by two monks that had come over to China to study, and they brought the tea over. And at that time, tea was a drink that was, you whisked it, it was a powder. And it sort of lay, like the idea of that kind of tea wasn't very popular in Japan at the time. But 2 centuries later, it picked up again and it became enmeshed in their culture and became, we now know it as the tea ceremony, the matcha and, the frothing, and it's all a very ritualistic thing. So, I mean, like, I found that sort of, you can follow the thread and see how these people are connected. I mean, they're not exactly found family because they're not like choosing to be together, but at the same time they are connected in that way.
And food, and the movement of food, and how food is involved in ritual and in family and in society, is a big way to bring people together, because food is a communal system, conversation, for politics and all that sort of thing. So of course, you get your people meeting in a tavern and that sort of thing, or meeting over the dinner table, or families coming together around the dinner table. So I like stories that are really comforting, having a cup of tea, or conversations happening around the dinner table. And I really appreciate those sort of details that go into not just what's on the table, but the history of where they came from. Yeah.
And
Okay,
how they
oh,
share, right?
Yeah.
Like how
yeah.
they
Yeah,
make
it's interesting. I
rituals
was
around
thinking about
that.
food a lot
Mm,
when you were talking, Alice. It's like think about something like the tomato, right, which originates here in this part of the world, in our hemisphere, but is like indelibly associated with the cuisine of Italy, right? Like imagine, but I think in a more close way, the actual cuisines, like there's nothing more, we just finished Passover week before last, and the meal, right, is so central to that. And so there are people who bond, who do not, kind of like you mentioned with Buddhism. Obviously Judaism is a religion, but it is also much more than that. And I think things like these ceremonial meals become really important for people to connect with each other, sort of laterally, but also sort of vertically, like through history. They're connecting with all of their ancestors, which presumably are shared, at least culturally at some point. But I love those kinds of stories where people come together for, well, I obviously love food, but where people come together over food, like you said, AJ, and really like there's something about that. I there's some writers who really focus on food, um, but even just in a passing way, I think it's really important and special.
It adds color and,
Mhm.
excuse the pun, flavor to the
Yes,
story.
100%.
And there's also some, there can be some fraught politics within a group about the history of maybe a stolen food group, or one of the stupid things between Australia and New Zealand is we're always arguing about who created the pavlova. So it can be anywhere from a joke like that through to something really politically fraught in the group, about the history of where a food came from, and who owns it, and all that sort of thing. So that is some really great dynamics that goes right back into the history of the places where your characters are coming from. So
Yeah,
thank you
well,
for that. That was
and yeah,
some
and colonialism, right, ties into that. Like here
yes.
in the southern part of the United States, our classic famous dishes are extremely heavily influenced by the cuisine and history of Africa because of, of my ancestors' exploitation of those people. And so you have both bonding and exclusion around things like fried chicken, or,
Mm,
those kinds of
yeah.
things.
Mm, mm, absolutely. Yes, thank you for that. Oh, now it's like 10:30 at night and I'm hungry all over again.
There's
Okay,
this
we're going
great dish in oh, sorry, go on.
No, you finished. Tell me about this great
Oh,
dish.
I was just gonna say this. It's a New Year's dish in Singapore and Malaysia called I can't remember. It's either Mai or Isai or something, but it's that dish where it's like a salad with salmon, like sashimi, and crispy fried wontons. And the ritual is that, you have this whole thing, it's beautifully set out, and each separate little like ingredient is like set out separately on the platter. And then you get these long chopsticks. And for New Year's, you come together with all your friends and family and you toss it. And the higher you toss it, the better the luck there is for the next year. And what's interesting about this dish is that it was created when Singapore and Malaysia were not separated. And so, it exists on both sides of the border, but now there's a border. And so, there's a little bit of like, oh, who created it first? But actually, it's like, well, you probably both created it at the same time because you were once together and now you're separated. So it was quite, yeah, that's a good, but then it's a celebration. So I think a celebratory dish. So,
Mm.
in a weird way, it still transcends that division, which is nice.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Alice. Okay, so we're going to come down to the middle of our inverted pyramid and come into what is one of my favorite places to be, the mid-focus, the social systems, the legal systems, the economic systems of the communities and the countries, whether that's at the big government level down to family systems. And one of my favorite places to focus is, of course, gender systems
Mm.
and breaking hierarchy within legalities. That's a place that I like to investigate a lot, and how everything about the legal and social systems that affect a family or a community makeup, that things that focus on, age and gender and health and education and all those sort of things. So how about one of you put up your hand and talk to me about one of the systems that's really important to you, one of the legal or social systems that's important to you for the creation or breaking the system for a found family. Who would like to go?
Well, I can chime in if you want to think for another moment else. For me, one of the
Yeah.
things I really focus on, and this has come up in my writing and in my game writing too, is ability. I think that the legal systems and the social systems around that, like what what is a person perceived to be able to do or not to be able to do because of body differences or neurotypicality or those kinds of things. And I think that's again, that can be a really important crucible to steal Alice's uh wonderful term.
That was
uh,
you.
was it me?
That
I
was
thought you said
originally yours.
crucible.
Yes.
Okay, well,
I was
I'll take the W.
okay, fair enough.
But I think, I mean, and I mentioned Our Flag Means Death earlier. That's a great example of, different, you have people with different levels of ability that that are still, incorporated, right? You have, someone who wears a leg brace and someone who has a speech difference and, and a facial difference and just, it's someone who is, who is overweight and just all these different body types and levels of ability, I think is really something that we are only just now, at least here in the States, kind of starting to talk about in the public discourse. We certainly have not achieved parity in other systems, gender
Mhm.
or race or, or sexuality, but at least the conversation has been around. And I think we're just really at the beginning of the ability, anti-ableism conversation. So that's something that's been very much on my mind. We had a character who loses an arm, and we're like, well, he's this is bad for him. He would do anything to get his arm back. He's gonna talk to these aliens about, save. And we're like, wait a minute, that's no, we rewrote it entirely so that's not that perceived loss of ability, that perceived failing, right, as a person because of the limb loss is not a reason to be desperate or, I would rather be dead. Those kinds of
Mm.
things that you hear people say. So it's
Mm.
it's very pressing for me personally, and then something that I look for in the fiction also.
Mm. And that's one of the great things about found families that I like, found families and mixed group people, is that the diversity in found family stories is that they're supporting each other. So while someone might have a disability or a mental health issue, there's always someone there to back them up and help them through and all that sort of thing. And someone else's strength, that they lend their strength to them, and I just love that in found families. What about you, Alice? What's a legal or social system or mix that's important to you?
So in my stories, I tend to deal with hierarchy and social expectations. So, um, a lot of my work is inspired by my heritage, which, in Chinese culture, it's the hierarchy. There is a given hierarchy for how things, senior respect and whatever, like where people stand. And in my books, that exists, but it's more of a flat structure, kind of. It's more socialist. So it's very much based on merit, and I think like the boxes that people are put in. So so my main character in my novel is very much she's titled. Um, she's supposed to be a noble. She's supposed to behave a certain way because she's a noble, and she's like sort of like a princess. And she's very much like, no, I behave how I behave, and I don't want to be in that box. And you know, I think it's very much about when you don't want to be in that box, you seek out other people who don't necessarily want to be in their box either. And from that, you kind of find where you belong, or create a place for yourself where you belong, which I think is probably better than, just kind of finding a slot where you think, oh yeah, okay, I can fit in there. It's like, no, actually, people are all different. And when you kind of throw off the hierarchy and say, actually, I'm going to pave my own way. I don't want to fit in this mold. I don't want to fit in this hierarchy. Um, it does kind of, it's hard because the rest of society is like that. There's certain gender expectations, and when you're just one who throws that off, you do need to find what you're saying, that support, the community that will accept you for who you are and how you are and your choices and your actions. um so yeah, that's something. I mean, it's not so much a legal thing. It's definitely more social and more of a cultural mores construct. But yeah, that's something that I like to explore. And I think, on an individual basis, I think that's what enables people to be like, okay, I'm going to break out of this box, like the class system. I don't want to play this game. I'm going to do it my way.
Mm. Yeah, and thinking about breaking those social malls, breaking the box. Um, I think about myself, for example, when I was young and I didn't understand my queerness. I had no idea where to look for support. So writing in, the real trials and tribulations of finding that support and the fear of going into unknown places and to unknown people is a great way to put in that tension when looking for the people that you want. You might even not even know that these people exist. And that's one of the things someone was talking about, the epiphany of finding people by accident.
Mm.
The accidentally coming across people as, the meet cute, like maybe a queer meet
Yes.
cute or a found family meet cute and all that sort of thing. Those sort of things are great as well. I do focus on intentionally finding, but yes, the meet cute is fantastic as well. And okay, so one of the things that I like to focus on is gender dynamics and sexuality dynamics, and the social systems within different societies and all that sort of thing. And this is, you know, with the focus on diversity in science fiction, especially science fiction and fantasy, especially within the found family system of stories. This is a really great place to investigate that, and that's why I like going into talking about found families. So how do we go about investigating and dealing with gendered systems and imagining a better future, a better place for these people who are in this found family? Would one of you like to leap in with one of those ideas?
I mean, I think part of it is really, I mean, there's a great book on, I don't know if you've read Matthew Salesses, his Craft in the Real World. Anyway, it's a really good book. And he talks about lenses, how we as writers there's many layers to how we write. So when we write, there's an implied narrator. There's also an implied reader. And we bring all of our own baggage to our stories. And part of, I think, the first step is really important, is to be aware of the baggage that we bring to our stories. You know, if we want to talk about gendered systems, you know, like I've seen fantasy writers like, oh, we're going to do a fantasy, it's really great. And oh, there's somebody here and they don't have a last name because they don't have a dad. And I'm like, like, does it have to be like that? Like, that is a very patriarchal system. And I don't know that you've realized that that's what's being built into your story because of the things that, you know, we as writers are bringing into the story without really realizing it. And I think that's one of the first things to do, is to like interrogate yourself and be like, okay, what am I writing? What am I writing into my story that I'm not aware that I'm doing? And I think that's like a really good start. And then you start going, okay, I'm going to create systems. I'm going to create systems that address this and, you know, build something completely different. But yeah, you have to interrogate that first step, the basis. Like, are you just scaffolding the same thing as what exists, you know, in the real world? Because if you are, then that's like patriarchy. And I don't think that's what you want.
Yeah, I think there's some great, and I'm trying to remember. I clicked to another tab to I think it's Harvard has created the implicit bias test. So if you just like Google implicit bias test, it's actually a really great tool for, you know, for kind of helping you find some of those biases, and they deal with all kinds of like several different metrics, age, like it's not just race, you know, perceived race or gender, but also, you know, age and all sorts of different factors. And it's really interesting. And of course you can take it at different stages, you know, of your life or different things and get slightly different answers. But I think that's a good, especially if you find this sort of like self-interrogation difficult or uncomfortable, that's a way to kick that off, I think. And then that gives you some things to sink your, you know, your teeth into as you continue that process.
That's really interesting, thinking about the implicit bias. One of the things that really bugs me about when stories talk about family is how there always almost seems to be this telepathic connection, like your mother disappeared or your mother died, or we're searching for your mother and it's been 20-30 years since you've seen your mother, but she's still your mother, and you have this connection to each other that's almost telepathic. But it's like, no, a mother or a parent is a social construct as well, and to be that parent, they have to be there socially for you from the beginning. It's not an inherent skill. It's something that you are learning, and as the child grows up. So that's why I like having found families who are they're not exactly taking the parenting role, but they see, you know, a person who needs to be parented, and they have those skills already, and they're not just out there Ray Skywalker searching for the parents, and they're going to accept me back, even though it's been 20 odd years or whatever, and all that sort of thing. It's not how it always works.
Mm.
And another thing I really like looking into, one of the things I've been looking into recently has been fostering systems, and how, especially in New Zealand, for the novel that I'm writing at the moment, Māori whānau family fostering systems where grandparents looked after the children and cousins and all this sort of thing, and this great big household, and so that a lot of children grew up together with a lot of wisdom from older aunties and uncles and grandparents and all that sort of thing, while parents were off working and all that sort of thing. And this was a system that was broken by colonization. So this is another, while there's still some biological family to it, it's also taking in friends and all that sort of thing. And it's a natural part. Maybe different societies have, different societies do have different ways of doing different family styles. It's not just mum, dad, and the kids, and the nuclear family. And I'm really interested in busting the old ideas of nuclear families and how it all comes down to capitalism, and the having individualized families keeps people apart, and yeah, capitalism and all that sort of thing. So breaking heteronormative nuclear families is a big idea to me in my writing. So yeah, looking at the implicit bias that you were both talking about what makes a family and a family structure is a good place to look into for the research as well. So we're going to come down to the bottom of the pyramid now, the narrow focus, individual characters and their interactions with the others in the family. So we're going to talk.
I was just going to jump in on the last thing about the nuclear family, because that is I feel like it's a very American Western kind of construct. If you look at other cultures, often it's like, you know, it's like it takes a village to raise a kid. That often, you know, you have everybody who is involved, and that's a very different, I think it's a cultural thing, but also, you know, the whole concept of, you know, you lost your parent as a child or whatever, and it's like, oh, they're going to come back, you know, what you were talking about, that sort of pie in the sky thinking. And I mean, that's also trauma, like the idea that, you know, you hold on to it so tight, oh, it's like it's like a trauma response to a relationship that isn't giving you what you need. And so you kind of, with rosy tinted glasses, you're like, oh no, once I have them back, you know, that hole in my life is going to be done, like fixed, magically fixed. And that's something, you know, definitely I think that found family can step in and be like, actually no, let's take those rose tinted glasses off, because that person is not in your life. And you know, there are different forms of love that will still fulfill you if you realize it, you know, because I think a lot of that that sort of you know, bad relationships are like that too, where you have this trauma response and you don't really like realize. I had a terrible boyfriend when I was younger, and I didn't realize until seriously in my like 40s that I was like, oh, that's why I was so attached to that person who was a shit. You know, like why? Like why? He was a terrible person. I recognize that. I know that, but wow, I just felt so, you know, so connected to him, and now I'm like, yes, trauma. That's why he was a shit. So anyway, so let's go on to individuals.
I really appreciate you, you know, going a bit further into that, Alice. Thank you so much. Yes, the individual level. And what you were saying about trauma is here. One of the things that I'm really interested about is how trauma informs a person's reactions and the love and care they think they do or don't deserve. So yeah, that is bringing it right down into the individual level now. Broken people, they're interesting to me, and how broken people and the broken parts of people fit together in families. And was it Eugene that just mentioned Murderbot? Absolutely broken person who is always, I don't need a family, I don't need friends, all that sort of thing. But the through line of Murderbot is that Murderbot has got a family right from the beginning, even if it's like the scientists and the people on the planet with them at the beginning. And there's like, okay, fine, I have a family. I guess I just have to deal with it. So yeah, Murderbot is just my absolute jam. Love them so much.
I haven't read it yet. I need to read it because I've heard
Yeah.
so many good things about it.
Yeah. So yes, trauma, it's a terrible thing, and you need to approach it with sensitivity. And again, we're going back to that implicit bias thing, is think about how to approach it with sensitivity and in a different way, instead of just the broken person hurts people. So would anybody else like to go a little bit more into the narrower focus and these personal adaptations of different people together?
Yeah, I think, and I'm sorry, I don't know if your name is Rye or Ree, in the chat mentioned, you get these like locked in roles often, like there's a mom and a dad or, whatever. We talked about this a little bit. I told AJ I might bring in some of the learning from the conversation in a different Found Families panel from yesterday, not so much about creating them, but I guess finding them. Oh, thank you, Rye. And one example that came up, actually was brought up in the chat, was Critical Role, which is a great example because it's a real world found family, a group of people who are creating a fictional found family, several times. But they really interrogate that role, like people being locked into roles. And there was a spoilers for Critical Role, I guess, in the second campaign. You have two characters who everyone assumes one is the protector, right? He's a wizard. He's a human, so he's physically larger. And then there's a character who is a goblin who seems more dysfunctional and seems more chaotic in a lot of ways, but she is actually his protector. Like she perceives herself as being the the protector of this human adult male, and he needs it. He has he has some PTSD issues that come up, and I love that role reversal. I like when people can can tweak that, and over the course of the story they both in the context of that whole group grow to kind of trade that role off, and you realize that really everyone is everyone's caretaker at some level. And I think that's a really interesting approach, rather than having someone who's the mom, who's the caretaker, and someone who's the dad, who's the leader, and those different roles. Again, it's a tricky thing, I think, because I think a lot of us grew up reading books that had those tropes, and so it's a different kind of implicit bias that is maybe a little hard to break free from.
And I'm really into stories that break those molds as well, and it's not just about diversity, it's about having so many different people. There, for 8 billion people in the world, there's 8 billion different personalities. We're not all the same, so or not one star sign or all that sort of thing. So having really disparate people is a great way to create stories, create tension, create softness. One of my favorite things to do is take a broken older person, usually a woman, who is just you know, got this really hard shell around them, and they just think they're going to be alone for the rest of their days. And having not necessarily a young person who comes along and starts taking care of them, but somebody who's softer and is, you know, ready to let, you know, that get through that hard shell, and seeing these two really different people loving each other, and taking, you know, somebody with a broken heart, finally letting somebody in. And I know that sounds kind of tropey, but it really does a lot for me, especially when it's an older person with a broken heart. And I also like big mask people, whether it's a bear or a butch, who are just so sweet and kind, and they like do the sewing and the cooking and looking after the kids and all that sort of thing. So just chucking in really different characters causes you, you know, can bring interesting tension, interesting stories, interesting kindness. What about you, Alice? What's your jam and individual characters and dynamics?
Well, I really love like what you were saying, the cranky, kind of broken person who is slowly brought around. It's like, that I think is just it's lovely. It's heartwarming. Something I really love is like different love languages, so like in Chinese stories, they tend to be like Chinese culture, it tends not to be declarative. It tends to be a lot of service. You do things for people. Like, parents tend to like, oh, I'll drive you around for hours to your various lessons as a child, or I'll cook for you and it'll take like 3 days to make whatever it is that you really love. Um, and I think that's something that I really like, that sort of a gentle kind of love that you don't really, and it's really easy, like especially if you have like a broken person, for them not to really realize because they're so angry with everything, and then slowly come to the realization like, oh my god, oh my god, like you've been doing this for me all along and I never knew, like that. So I love it. But it could be because I'm like, oh yeah, that's like totally like my childhood. It's like selfish, crappy little teenager, and then you grow up and you're like, oh yeah, that was the real shit. So yeah, that's totally something that I really like to explore, and like create that arc where the reader can see, oh, this person is like this at the start, and then slowly, 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 like you see their heart opening up, and all the little walls, all those bricks, kind of slowly, one by one, just falling. And I think that's really so satisfying.
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh, we're getting into some really
Oh my
interesting
gosh,
territory, and you know
yeah,
what? We're out of time.
we're out of time.
We've got through our hour already. So let's do a quick whiz around. Where will we find you online? And what's your latest book, story, creative pursuit at the moment? Jen, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram or Twitter as at Jen Spurko. That's JenSpirko. You can see it in there. For some reason, my usernames are always with one N. I don't know. You can also find me on Instagram as RJ Spurko, which is the name under which I write, because I collaborate with my husband, who's an R. And our book, Horn and Heart Sword, is coming out this summer. So follow RJ Spurko to find out when that will happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Alice, where can we
Um,
find you?
you can you can find me on Instagram and Twitter as AY_Chao, CHAO, or I also have a website, AYChao, so AYCHAO.com. My debut, Shanghai Immortal, is coming out the 1st of June. And yeah, it's very exciting. It's set in 1930 Shanghai. It's all like Chinese folklore and mythology. Um, a lot of the like all the deities are ministers, so it's very bureaucratic. And my main character, she's like, a little bit broken, she's quite snarky, quite kind of prickly. Yeah, and she has a nice arc where she kind of, those little walls start falling, so it's really nice.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. And I'm at AJ Fitzwater, wherever you find me, Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, and Tumblr. And my book is available in the book dealer's room, The Voyages of Sinrak the Dapper. which is Found Family Pirates, lesbian capybara pirate
The
captain,
best.
and her found family of sweet queer rodents, changing the world one rat at a time. So that's available in the dealer's room at the moment. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining me. Well, that hour just went so quickly. I feel like we could have spent a heck of a lot more time talking about it. So if anybody wants to chat a little bit longer, we'll be in Discord on the Spire room. Yes. So thank you
Okay.
very much.